Welcome to It Is Written Canada. Have you ever felt like running away from your own life? Have you experienced restless days and nights trying to outrun a decision that you know is good for you, but you fear the unknown and perhaps the change that it may bring with it?
Have you experienced an unstable yet loving home, a home where you had to split up your time between the people you love the most? Imagine a young boy seeing his own mother falling very ill and becoming addicted to the pills that she receives while in hospital care.
You grow up with addiction being part of your vocabulary and experience recovery through the actions of your mother. You catch a glimpse of the hopeful but distant world of recovery.
Today on It Is Written Canada, Blair Nolan has agreed to open his heart and become very vulnerable, sharing his story of restless running to a life he thought was too good to be true.
Hi, my name's Blair, and I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia. Well, I definitely had a unique upbringing. My parents were separated before I have any memories, around 1 year old. Was back and forth throughout my childhood. I started with my mom. I was with my mom till I was 6 years old. She got sick with her kidney. She ended up losing one of her kidneys, and I went to live with my dad for a few years, and that was the first time away from mom as a young kid. That was tough years, I remember that. Looking back on those 3 or 4 years, those were really nice years to spend time with my dad. You know, just the guys, single dad, coaching my sports, and lots of fun though. So as I was staying with my mom, it's when she was sick, losing her kidney, that she really developed addiction. Also, I was 12 years old. That's when I stayed at that recovery house for a bit, but my mom had gone to treatment prior to that. I haven't thought about this stuff in a long time. You know, like a long time. Yeah, it's just, first of all, it's not very easy. So looking back on my childhood, I definitely had a lot of ups and downs. There was difficult times, but there was lots of good times too. My dad worked really hard to take care of me and everything he needed to for the house. Mom gave me lots of love when she was available and she was able to. One thing I do take from it though, it did teach me about recovery. Seeing my mom struggle with addiction a little bit, I always knew that there was another way. And, you know, as I got into my teens and started to drink 13, 14 years old with friends, realized really early on that I was different than most of my friends. That I ended up with consequences from drinking. I ended up blacking out. I ended up wanting more, embarrassing myself. And right away I was able to, you know, diagnose myself as an alcoholic. Right away I sort of knew that I was going to be different, that I was going to be an addict, I guess you could say. Looking back on my teens and early adult life, that was really, you know, setting the stage for later on in my addiction. Starting off with smoking pot and drinking alcohol and As you get older, you're popping pills and doing other drugs, staying up late. And in 2013, I had stopped working and met a girl and decided to try crystal meth for the first time. Shortly thereafter, I was homeless. My dad, who was my biggest supporter, who always allowed me to stay in his home, had finally decided that, he couldn't do that anymore and he needed to ask me to leave. And I remember that first night, homeless, not knowing where to go or what to do, and sleeping in his carport outside his car, and I think he told me he walked over me and, to get into his car to go to work, and there's his son, almost, 28 years old, sleeping on the ground outside his car. And looking back on it, I could only imagine how difficult, that must have been for him. I'm homeless. I think I go to Broadway and commercial first and sort of get started there. And, that next 2 years of homelessness is a bit of a blur. One long marathon race with maybe a few breaks over the year and a half. In and out of jail, hospital, non-compliant with my medication, going on runs fueled by drugs and ending up in hospital every 6 weeks or so, and having them nurse me back to health and get me back on my feet just to set me up for another run. Those runs got shorter and shorter over that 2-year period. And when it started off, I was probably outgoing for 2 or 3 months, and then it was 2 months and 1 month and 3 weeks, and and the next thing you know, you're in the hospital every 2 weeks. And the desire to get sober was always there, but it's always tomorrow. It's never right now. Once I finish this, or once this happens, then I'll do that. You want the consequences to stop. You want people to not be mad at you anymore. You want to keep your job. You want to keep your relationship. So you're trying to get clean. You're going to treatment, and really, putting in an effort, but not a full commitment, a full buy-in. And I learned later in life that's what it takes, a full commitment, a willingness to turn over every stone, to do whatever suggestion is given to you. I was willing to take most of the suggestions. I was willing to try to put some effort in, but ultimately it was, still on my time, my way a bit, and that led me to more use, more failure.
So let me ask you a question. Do we all have to go through our own process of recovery? Is this thing of running away something new, or has it been happening throughout the ages?
In ancient times, the Bible tells us that Adam and Eve ran away from God. Jonah ran away from God. Elijah ran for his life. Peter turned his back on Jesus. Whenever God-fearing men and women, children of God, ran away, God outran them.
I can remember walking through Hastings and running into a friend, Dave Miller. He was sober. He was at Harbor Light. He was telling me to come in, that they have space, and I remember taking him for lunch. We went to get pizza, and he was telling me that he was clean for like a month, and this is someone I used with and someone I trusted. And I remember telling him that, you'll see me there, I'm coming, I'm coming. I just gotta finish doing what I'm doing here, but I'm coming. I didn't fully believe him that he was clean, like I was hearing it, but I was so beaten up in addiction at that point. I remember offering him, drugs, and he didn't want it, and that was powerful. That stuck with me. I'd like to say that I went to treatment that day, or I went to detox that day. I didn't. In the middle of that time there, I had my first real overdose. It was around 2:30 in the morning, just off of Hastings in the industrial area. I found a working girl. I offered to get her high if she would inject me, and she said sure, and she injected me and I overdosed. By the grace of God, somehow I had a cell phone, which I never had really homeless. She didn't rob me, you know, she didn't leave me, and she used this phone that I miraculously had and called paramedics, and I remember them bringing me back and me thinking like, I wish I was back under, you know, coming back to life and all the stress. And that was definitely powerful. So that definitely, I think, scared me or woke me up a bit. I had nowhere I could go really to. I had burned through everyone I knew. No one was willing to offer a helping hand. No one really wanted to see me. You know, I didn't have many friends left. I wasn't in communication with my family, and ultimately I think I realized I was tired. Really tired, and realizing that I think it's time that I tried something different and give recovery a shot.
Why are you running? Maybe it's fear or pride or lack of faith or arrogance or bitterness or an addiction to chronic busyness or guilt, shame and remorse. Maybe you can't stop beating yourself up for something you said or did, or something you didn't do or didn't say.
We invite you to think about your life. Perhaps you need to stop running away from something and start running towards something greater than yourself. God can turn us around and point us in the right direction, like He did with Blair.
Looking back at my friend Dave, who told me he was at treatment, told me he was clean, and I remember him telling me, and he was staying at Harbor Light, which is a Salvation Army 12-step based treatment center in the downtown east side. Shortly after that overdose, a few days or maybe a week later, I found myself being admitted to Harbor Light. And, you know, I was tired and 150 pounds, very sick, but I had a desire to change my life. You know, there was many suggestions that were given to me as a newcomer to treatment. One that in the past I hadn't opened up to, or I hadn't been able to take the lead, was higher power. You know, early on I opened up the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and throughout it was the suggestion to find a higher power. Growing up, I wasn't taught much about God or religion, and I didn't really know how that looked. But I said then that I was willing. You know, I was open-minded, and more than anything, I was going to take all the suggestions, and one of them was to find higher power. It started right there. I just said I was open, I was willing, and that was sort of the end of that, you know. You know, I went on with my recovery and did a set of steps and started going to some fellowship on Sunday at the Anchor Church across the street from Harbor Light. And that was the first time that I connected, you know, to faith-based, to a church. And, you know, I enjoyed the fellowship. I didn't know much. I didn't know it then, that I think God was sort of calling me. But it was, you know, something that I was open to. Looking back, remembering to the early days at Harbor Light, and you know, coming off the street and not having to be anywhere at any given time, it was a bit of an adjustment. You know, life in treatment, you're going to group, you're having a morning reflections where there's a small prayer and some songs. One of the big things I think about Harbor Light and Salvation Army is the food line. You're almost instilling a bit of a work ethic into the guys. A lot of us coming off the street haven't worked in a long time, haven't been productive, and now twice a day you're serving homeless people meals in the downtown east side, and there's an accountability to that. Everyone gets a job and you're expected to be there on time, and you know, it's not for you, it's for others, and just giving us that routine, you know, that stability. I think back to my last year's homeless, and I explained it to people like it was like I was on a race. You know, in my mind I was running to drugs, but really I think I was running from life, right? I was running from me and from what I had to do. And getting to Harbor Light and having somewhere safe where I had fellowship. You know, I had friends who I knew who were already there, who were further along the journey than I was. They guided me. They gave me support. I think in the past I was pulled to the wrong people, wrong situations. And for the first time, I was hanging out with the people doing the right things. I was hanging out with the people who had more clean time than me, who were further along, and I just stuck close with them. And that year was amazing. I was in phase 3 at Harbor Light and had the opportunity to move to a second stage recovery facility, also run by Salvation Army, called Grace Mansion, where I was able to get my first set of keys in a little while. I remember that feeling when you're homeless, you don't have keys. To have my own keys to my own door was a good feeling for sure.
Blair didn't know God was there all along watching over him, but he was.
Friends, God is patiently waiting for you too. Your Savior promises you, and He promises me, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Never. He will never leave you. He assures you today, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you.
God is with you, even if He feels far from you. Jesus promises you, I am with you always, even to the end of the world.
When your sky is cold and lonely, and your heart is filled with fear, Jesus promises, I will wrap my arms around you. I want you to know that I am here. I will keep you safe and sound through the darkness that surrounds. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Know that I am with you. You will never be alone.
I think it was the first time in a while my life kind of calmed down. You know, I had a safe space that was my own. There wasn't a whole lot going on then. You know, there wasn't a lot of social calendar events. There was no dating. There was none of that. Just a lot of sort of quiet time. I think in that space is where I started to develop my connection to higher power, where I started to shift from higher power to God. And in that time, that's when I started to pray. I found that it gave me this sense of calm, but it also gave me this positive outlook. From that prayer, I found some hope and some trust and some belief. You know, these were all things that I didn't have any of, right? Trust was broken entirely. There was very little belief, you know, especially in myself or, you know, in the people around me. Those next few years where I really developed that connection to God, that belief in something greater than myself. As I started to pray for things and these prayers were answered, it really was an aha moment for me. Well, it confirmed what I was doing, confirmed the road I was on. it definitely told me I was where I was supposed to be. And I had that belief, you know, like with my job, it's not, you know, there's always people talking about more money because they don't pay as much, right? But I never had a desire to leave, you know, because I knew I was where I was supposed to be, you know. So all these little things that people stress went out of the way for me because I was where I was supposed to be. It was a very one-on-one connection with God, for me especially. It wasn't observed around other people. It wasn't something that I wasn't going to church, but I was praying every day. As I started to grow in my faith, I started to pray for family members. I started to pray for my mom, who was MIA for 10 years in addiction. And here I am a few years clean and wanting that connection back. Now it's something that's on my mind and something that I'm praying for and asking for help. And a few years later, or a year or two later, my mom ends up in treatment and, you know, is back in my life, and there's confirmation, you know, that God is here, God is hearing me. And that, yeah, that sense of belief was definitely there. Also, just as you go through life with work and putting yourself out there for jobs, for promotions, for me, I guess it was just learning how to live life, right? I gained employment with Salvation Army in around year 4 or 5 of my journey in sobriety. And in that process, I put myself out there for supervisor jobs, for outreach. So I put myself out there sort of to be judged. And that's the first time in a few years, and I remember being triggered by that and feeling insecure, or maybe feeling stress about not knowing if I'll get it or not. And I had this really aha moment with God where I decided to pray and accept whatever was going to come my way. Not try to control it and pray for the promotion, but pray for whatever comes my way. You know, if I get it, then okay, that's what's meant to be, and I'll be of service. But if I don't get it, then it's because this person is prepared in a way that maybe I'm not quite prepared, or whatever. But just having that trust in God's plan, that God will provide what is. It's not so much that I got those jobs that I applied for, you know, the successes came, but it was learning how to trust and learning how to navigate stress, learning how to navigate things that used to baffle me, that used to lead to use, that used to lead to running away. And that's what laid the groundwork for the next few years, you know. By the grace of God, I've been going now 9 years. You know, I got sober in August of 2015. You know, that journey to faith has been a continual one. It wasn't just like that for me. You know, it started with me having to take suggestions, find higher power. I'm willing. I'm open to that. And then some prayer. You know, meditation and prayer was suggested in the big book, and so I did some of that. And I was doing it at first because I was told to, because I was suggested to. Ultimately in there, I found my own connection to God though, you know, and that's what kept me coming back for more, right? Was my own connection, you know.
When Blair's prayers were answered, it was the deeply profound moment that confirmed he was on the right road. He knew he was where he should be, exactly where God wanted him.
Blair came to the place where he felt needed and not needy. And that's how he continued to walk with God, in that one-on-one connection between himself and God, living to serve others.
And I mean, as gut-wrenching as it was, putting my dad through what I put him through in addiction, I mean, him having to kick his only child out of the house, and I know how difficult that was for him. Our journey has come full circle. I remember him telling me, son, if you'll fight for your life, I'll fight with you, you know, and I wasn't willing to that day when he got in his car, went to work, but years later I started to fight, you know, and he's been there with me every step of the way. I mean, now he's my best friend. In the book, big book, they have the promises, right? Or I like to say like gifts of recovery. Over the last 9 years, I got a dog who I've kept alive for 7 years, who's been with me. It's such a blessing, right? I have a good connection with my family, connected with friends from my youth, and made lots of new friends and new connections. And I got my license at 38 years old. I've had different promotions and different roles within my job, and failures, successes, relationships, lost, the ups and downs, right? With God in my heart, today I know I can overcome those ups and downs. And they're smaller now. It's much more steady, but I think now, looking forward, keeping God close to me and knowing that, I'm with God, and anything is possible. If you just keep showing up, do the right thing, and have an open mind, life is great.
Friends, it all begins with freedom of choice, a most precious gift that God has entrusted to you. Unfortunately, our poor choices often lead to destructive habits that enslave us, damage our relationships, our health, and ruin our lives.
Friends, our free offer for you is a special Steps to Christ Recovery Edition. This powerful book includes a 12-step recovery program empowering you to overcome harmful habits and addictions. Above all, you will come to know Jesus Christ, the only one who can heal and restore, strengthen and encourage, as well as bring hope, balance, and meaning to your life.
We would like to offer to pray for you. If you would like to send us your personal prayer request, the information for how to contact us is on the screen. Tell us your request and we will put you on our prayer lists and pray for you personally.
Before you go, we would like to thank all of you who have supported the ministry of It Is Written Canada with your prayers and financial contributions. Without your support, this television ministry could not have reached so many people for so many decades.
Yes, thank you. And we would like to invite you to follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also listen to our podcasts. And if you go to our website, you can see our latest programs.
Friends, Jesus is offering you a life that is beyond our ongoing struggles with the pain, suffering, and sorrows of this life. We would like to recommend that you open the Bible, where it is recorded that Jesus himself found his assurance to defeat the devil through the word of his Father when he declared, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God."